We have now gotten a verdict in the Jerry Sandusky child molestation trial. Of course, Jerry Sandusky, the former Penn State assistant football coach, back on November 4th of 2011, he was charged with 40 counts of sex crimes against young boys following what was then a 3-year investigation. Then we saw the number of charges balloon up to 51 and then drop back down to 48 shortly before the case was turned over to the jury because 3 of those charges had, I believe it was either exceeded the statute of limitations or the witnesses had been submitted too late. But needless to say, of those 48 charges, we now have seen a guilty verdict on 45 of those. And this would be potentially 442 years in prison. It's likely, according to NBC News, that we're looking at least 60 years in prison. And at Jerry Sandusky's age, basically a life sentence is what we're talking about at this point. You know, we talk so much on the show about these stories, particularly more often, I have to admit, not with sports people, but with religious representatives, including priests. And we just did the story last week of a man who assaulted a priest who allegedly had raped him back in 1975, and now he is on trial for that assault. And we have so many complaints about the legal system lending itself to this type of vigilante justice because it doesn't properly go after some of these child predators. Do you think this is a case where justice was, quote, served in whatever kind of romanticized conception you have of that word? Or what do you think about how the legal system worked in this case?
Well, the legal system, I think, worked fine. I mean, this is actually pretty rapid. Once you got to the point where the public accusation was made.
And the charges were filed.
Right. I mean, the problem was before the legal system really got to it, that people weren't reporting what was going on.
Right.
And that sort of societal breakdown, I think, is hard to comprehend. We talk about how sort of, society has changed and people have different attitudes about this. I don't know when in society it was considered okay to be molesting underage children.
Well, what's interesting is that there are certain areas where it's not so much that it's okay, but it's kind of there's a culture of cover-up, right? I mean, when we look at the history of the Catholic Church, and we've talked about this so extensively, I think now there's a consensus that there at least there's an implicit there have been cover-ups and there have been relocations of people who have committed some of these vile sex crimes instead of reporting them to police authorities. And it's similar in a sense to the kind of culture of what's good for the Penn State football program is priority number 1, and whatever the legal or ethical responsibilities are going to fall secondary to that. And there's a similarity there, I think. But you're right, that's separate from the legal system.
Right, and you still have situations you had with the Roman Catholic Church, we're seeing now in ultra-Orthodox Judaism, where there's an attitude of, we'll take care of our own business.
Right.
And we're gonna stay a step removed from civil society and not have to go through the legal system, which I'm not defending in any way, shape, or form. But there's sort of at least a veneer of we're doing something.
Right.
We'll move this guy from this diocese to another diocese. Whereas in the Penn State case, someone chose to do nothing.
Right.
They didn't deal with this at all.
And again, there is ambiguity about whether legally they were doing anything wrong. In other words, as far as Mike McQueary, this other assistant coach who allegedly witnessed Jerry Sandusky in the shower, etc., as far as we know, he actually didn't break any laws. He reported it to his superior.
Right.
It was then that there was no further follow-up, that it didn't get further escalated, law enforcement brought in, etc.
Right. And that's where I don't think we quite know who is the exact person that really had the responsibility, had the legal responsibility to report it and didn't.
Right. And I think that now there is discussion of the same way that in New York there's a discussion of changing the law that says it's illegal to download child porn, but if you were just looking at it on the screen and not actually hitting download, even though really your browser actually does download every picture you see, that is being kind of addressed now legislatively. In Pennsylvania, we also, I think, need to see something similar happen.
I mean, hopefully any more attention and pressure this puts on, filling these legal gaps, and maybe in private organizations, making it very clear what your legal and moral responsibility is when you come across situations like this. Hopefully that becomes more clear. I mean, you can understand a little bit someone not wanting to take an act prematurely and besmirch one's reputation unfairly.
Sure.
But in this case, it didn't seem like you had a close call here that you had to worry about.
Certainly not. And Fox News mixing up a little bit of the reporting on this Jerry Sandusky verdict. You know, Fox News is notorious for when a Republican does something bad, wrong against the law, they mislabel them as a Democrat. Very, very common. It shows up with a D next to their name. It's happening, you know, a little too often to be considered complete and utter coincidence, but we have no evidence that there's any kind of conspiracy there. Now we have a little bit of video here where this is kind of opposite. I'm trying to interpret this myself. Maybe it's just a mix-up. Talking about the Jerry Sandusky verdict, showing video of Mitch Daniels, identifying Mitch Daniels, the Republican, as the convicted child predator. And you know what? I don't think we're going to be able to put the video up because we're having some kind of technical difficulty here. But that being said, at least some evidence that it's general incompetence at Fox News and not so much geared towards making Democrats look bad, the fact that they would mislabel Mitch Daniels as a child predator.
Well, I'm not going to stick up for Fox News here.
Okay, all right.
But I do think this does speak to the possibility that it's not that their minions are always trying to smear Democrats.
Sure.
It's that they just have generally incompetent staff.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
The Fox News business model is to not spend money on actual news gathering.
Right.
And to
spend it on graphics, wardrobe,
exactly.
tanning, and stuff like that.
And opinion is cheap.
Sure.
So if you don't bother with hiring a staff that knows who is who when you see a photograph, you know, if that doesn't affect your ratings, who cares?
Yeah, of course.